Always Mine by SamadiW. Chapter 15. Hermione opened her eyes to find herself curled into a ball on the sofa in the Gryffindor common room. The events from yesterday seemed like a blur. Throwing off her blanket, she stood up with renewed purpose. Despite everything that happened, she felt strong. The child she now carried needed her strength. Hopeful of an uncertain future, she tenderly ran her hand across her stomach and smiled. A strange excitement built up. She felt unbreakable and indestructible. Leaving her friends momentarily, Hermione hurried back to the dorm room and took in the destruction that awaited her. Her hand went to cover her mouth in shock. What the hell happened here? A sea of empty bottles of fire whiskey lay discarded on the ground along with broken furniture and wood pieces. She glanced in the direction of Draco's room anxiously. Careful not to trot on the broken glass, she tiptoed around the lethal-looking shards and entered her room. Sadly, she looked at the mess one last time and thought bitterly, let him deal with the mess. Gently, she ran her fingers along the bedspread, sat down, pulled a pillow to her chest, and wept fresh tears of pain. Once she calmed herself, Hermione quickly changed into her robes and headed out to meet the headmistress. She silently thanked Merlin for not running into Draco, but nothing was left to say to each other. They were on different paths now. She threw his closed door one last look of anguish and fled the dorm. Hermione stood outside the stairway that led to the headmistress's office and let out an exhilarated sigh. She muttered the password and waited patiently for the gargoyle to grant her access. After a quick jog up the stairs, she knocked on the door and stood back. "Enter," came McGonagall's stern voice from inside. Hermione timidly stepped inside the lavish room and slowly approached the desk. McGonagall lowered her spectacles and studied the approaching young woman. She tried her best to hide her current predicament, but it was plain to see the lines of suffering that creased her young face. Minerva heard from the portraits and castle gossip that Mr. Malfoy had ended their relationship without reason, but seeing the toll it had taken on the Gryffindor was heartbreaking. She pointed to a seat and offered kindly, "Sit down, Miss Granger." The head girl smoothed her skirt, took the seat, and toyed with her fingers nervously as McGonagall asked gently, "What can I do for you?" Hermione hesitated. "I would like to return to the Gryffindor common room until graduation, Professor." Her voice cracked, but she held it together. "It's, difficult to be around him at present." McGonagall sighed. She walked around her desk and patted the distraught girl's head. Hermione looked up solemnly and tried to master a smile. McGonagall nodded. "Of course, Miss Granger. It will be done by the end of the day." Hermione gave a small sigh of relief and stood up to leave. McGonagall said sadly, "Miss Granger, try not to hate Mr. Malfoy too much. Lord knows that boy has been through more than we know, and it's evident the torment is yet to cease." Hermione nodded meekly, not trusting the words she would say. Hate? She could never hate him. She felt unwavering love for him. His touches, voice, and words were branded into her skin and mind. It made it impossible to feel anything but undying affection for him. His feelings on the matter were irrelevant. She could never have him, but would always have a piece of him close to her. Hermione lovingly caressed her abdomen. Draco stood in the middle of the dorm and stared at the empty room that was Hermione's. Visions of their love surrounded him, infectious laughter, intoxicating smell, and love-making. Everything good in his life was gone, leaving him to rot in the dark abyss of his own making. He broke down in the middle of the dorm and let the cries of despair erupt from his core. The violent sobs racked his body. He whispered her name reverently and begged forgiveness. "Please, forgive me." Graduation was coming, and the final year students spoke about it excitedly, except for the head girl and boy. They did their duties to perfection and avoided taking part in any festivities. McGonagall informed Hermione earlier that she, as head girl, would be expected to make a speech. She wondered why the head boy was spared such an honor. A speech about hope was something she could speak well on, considering her current situation. She tapped a quill against her chin in deep thought and jotted down a few important pointers to address. Draco stared at his witch from across the library and ached to go near. Blaise followed his gaze and patted him on the shoulder sympathetically. 2 days before graduation, Hermione sat on the floor of the Gryffindor common room with Harry, Ginny, and Ron. They spoke about their plans after Hogwarts. Harry and Ron would join the Ministry as first-level Aurors, and Ginny was taking a year off to play with the Holyhead Harpies before returning to Hogwarts to complete her nudes. Hermione sipped her hot chocolate and remained silent. Her once clear plans of joining the Department of Control and Regulation of Magical Creatures now seemed like a distant dream, at least until she gave birth. She would revisit her options afterwards. Her main focus and priority now would be the well-being of the child she carried. After much deliberation, she had decided that she needed a break from magic and its world. She smiled fondly at the people who loved her, who cared deeply about her, and said, "I am returning to the Muggle world until the baby is born." Everyone turned to stare at her in disbelief. Clearly, her bit of news was unwelcome. Undeterred, she said, "My parents want me to come home and be with them until I give birth." Her parents had been truly wonderful and understanding. Her father had been disappointed, but kept his feelings hidden. Hermione thought back to how incredibly supportive they had been. It was not pleasing for any parent to hear that their only child was pregnant at 18 years of age, out of wedlock, but her wonderful Muggle parents listened to every word she told them patiently, and then gathered her in their arms and reassured her that all would be well. They hugged her tightly and told her not to worry about anything. Their support meant everything to her, giving her the strength to take the next step. Her friends looked at her sadly. They were clearly disappointed by her decision. Ginny pouted. "But we will never get to see you." Hermione looked over at Harry. He nodded and smiled, and she knew he understood. She rolled her eyes. "Don't be silly, Gin. I will visit you guys, and you can visit me at any time." She bit her lip and averted her gaze. "It's just temporary, until I figure things out." Ron spoke up. He tried to keep his tone calm and even. "Are you sure you don't want to tell Malfoy you're pregnant?" Hermione toyed with her fingers and retorted. "It doesn't matter anymore. With or without him, this baby will have everything and be loved." Ginny perked up and smiled brightly. "I already love the baby." Harry hugged her from behind and rested his chin on her head. "We all do." Graduation. Last day at Hogwarts. Hermione felt her gaze drift towards Draco. He was staring at her anyways. It was nothing new. He openly stared at her without shame. His eyes gazed at her intently on most occasions. She held it and refused to back down. He had outdone himself. He looked so handsome in his robes. To glance at him was painful. His parents stood at his side, and she noticed him edged away from his father. Lucius diverted his attention and looked her way. He sized her up, sneered, and, with a final look of contempt, followed his wife and son out of the great hall. McGonagall said a few welcoming words and called Hermione on stage to deliver the speech. Nervous and on wobbly legs, Hermione made her way up to the makeshift platform and stood behind the podium. She looked into the sea of faces staring at her, hanging onto every word she would say. Hermione smiled, relaxed, and started to speak. "Never look back. Always look ahead. And don't let the past bring you down." She chose her ending with care. Each word held a profound meaning. Draco stiffened as Hermione ended her speech. Her last words went directly to his heart. He brought his head up and stared at her. Her eyes were already on him. A faint smile adorned her face as she made the loaded statement. Thundering applause broke out, and everyone rose to give her the standing ovation she deserved. Words could not express his pride in her. He wanted to hold her close to him and never let her go. He imagined her body underneath him, their love-making in the shower and on his bed as she moaned his name, his fingers entwined with hers. They would have celebrated this joyous occasion if his father hadn't intervened. Her laughter and how he missed her sweet happiness were forever gone. He hung his head in despair and put on a brave face. After the ceremony, parents took their leave, and all that remained was the ball in honor of the new graduates. Hermione looked at her reflection and smiled. Ginny was right. His shade of blue suited her. She subconsciously thought about how Draco always loved her in blue. It was rather shocking, considering everything he owned came in black, grey, or dark green. Ginny came up from behind, did the quick makeup check, and all but dragged Hermione to where the others were waiting. Hermione groaned. "Do I really have to go?" Ginny narrowed her eyes sternly. "Of course you have to go!" Harry and Ron covered their ears and grimaced. Ron frowned. "Blimey, can you quiet the fuck down, please?" Ginny stuck her tongue out, took Harry's hand, and kissed him lightly. Ron purposely looked away. He was still squeamish about their public displays of bloody affection. He turned to Hermione, smiled sheepishly, and offered his arm. Hermione eyed it curiously, grinned, and took it. Ron sighed in relief. They were good as friends, always better as friends. She had forgiven him for his past mistakes. Much to the girl's dismay, Ron had broken up with Lavender, but as he eloquently put it, "She's walking mad. I cannot stomach being with her anymore." Hand in hand, they approached the great hall, and Hermione laughed out loud at a joke Ron cracked. He pointed at Seamus' rather alarming pink boots and almost doubled over with laughter. Unconsciously, Hermione leaned against him without much thought. Despite the bitterness they suffered whilst together, it was easy to slip back into the close friendship they shared. Draco watched his beloved enter with none other than the Weasley firmly by her side. He turned steely grey eyes on them and fought the raging storm that erupted in the pit of his stomach. His temper and jealousy were clouding his better judgment. A delicate hand reached over and cupped his face. Astoria kissed him gently, making her presence known. He slightly pushed her away and rubbed his mouth in disgust. "When I want you, Astoria, you will know. Until then, stay the fuck away from me." Tears of frustration stung the girl's eyes, but this was what she signed up for. She would suck it up and put up with it. Blaise frowned at the interaction between the two and caught Astoria's narrowing her eyes at Draco's departing figure. Unable to stomach his so-called betrothed, Draco joined Theo, Luna, and Blaise by the buffet table and opened a bottle of fire whiskey without another word. Blaise watched his best friend in concern and warned, "Mate, slow down on the fucking booze." Draco eyed the bottle in interest and looked away. He pointed to the dance floor and spat bitterly. "There are worse ways to die." Blaise followed his friend's gaze, which landed on Ron awkwardly, trying to twirl Hermione. Hermione teased. "Stop it, Ronald." Ron whispered, "You look beautiful. You always do." She blushed at the compliment and replied, "We can't be more than friends." Ron laughed in his boyish way. He kissed her forehead. "Just because I said you look beautiful does not mean I want anything else." He added hopefully, "Unless you're offering." Hermione shoved him playfully. Draco banged the bottle hard on the table, wiped his mouth, and felt his breathing hitch. How dare she let weasel shit touch her? He couldn't bear it any longer. The anger was clouding his senses and daring him to do something foolhardy. He approached the couple on the dance floor. Blaise and Theo exchanged a look and stared after Draco. This was going to be a challenge for both parties. Draco tapped Ron aggressively on the shoulder and growled, "May I have this dance?" Ron sneered at Draco in disgust. "Fuck off, Malfoy. Hermione wants nothing to do with you." Standing his ground, the blonde Slytherin hissed, "The hats are supposed to dance together to set a better example." Hermione raised an eyebrow. She did not recall McGonagall mentioning that bit. Her ex-boyfriend looked intoxicated and unhinged. Not wanting to create a scene, and possibly looking for closure, she nodded, giving her consent. Ron reluctantly let go of her hand, stepped to the side, and let Draco take his place. Her hands trembled. Draco took Hermione's small, shaking hands and snaked his arm across her waist without hesitation, taking the lead. He pulled her close and inhaled the sweet, forbidden scent. She gasped at their close contact. His breath ghosted over the skin of her neck. He whispered into the shell of her ear. "Back with the weasel, I see." Hermione refused to take the bait. She stared into his startling grey eyes and smiled politely. "I wish you and Astoria all the best, Malfoy." He fucking hated it when she called him Malfoy. During their time together, she would moan his given name in pleasure. Little dulcet sounds turned him to no end. Having her call him Malfoy left him broken-hearted and in anguish. Breathing in her smell, she was driving him crazy. Hermione eyed him curiously and stopped. "I think we've shown enough unity for one night. Thank you, Malfoy." Pulled back her hand and turned to leave. Draco watched her departing figure with a heavy heart. Weaslette was giving him the death stare. He shrugged and headed back to crawl inside his bottle. The night got steadily worse for Draco, and despite her mood, Hermione enjoyed herself with her friends. Finally, it was over. They had to linger back as the head boy and girl to ensure everyone returned safely to their dorms. They stood by the entrance and watched the crowds of departing students. She was so close. Could hear the faint beating of her heart. Hermione sighed in exhaustion and turned to leave. Draco did not know what possessed him to do what he did next. He pulled her flush against him and kissed her passionately. Put his passion, love, everlasting misery and wanting into that last kiss. Caught off guard at first, it didn't take long for her to return his hunger and passion. She held on to him, her nails dug into the material of his new dress shirt. She ran her fingers through his platinum blonde hair in a moment of heated passion. Hermione reluctantly broke away from the embrace and looked at him through tear-stained eyelids. She choked back a sob. I hope you find everything you're looking for." He held her hand and kissed her knuckles. "Be happy, Hermione. Always." She absent-mindedly ran her free hand across her abdomen, but he did not notice. Hermione gave Draco a final departing smile and walked away from the one man she had ever truly loved. Their final year at Hogwarts had proven to be the most shocking one of all. Harry, Ron, and Hermione walked through the empty corridors of the legendary castle that had been their home and shelter. They had survived so much inside these walls. They had fought and found love. They looked around as ghosts of their many adventures whizzed around them. They held hands as they walked out of the castle towards the gleaming red Hogwarts Express. Their time at school was done. They would soon embark on a new adventure. To be continued. So, the school time is now officially over, but this story is not quite yet. We have 2 more chapters to go with a little time jump in between, and I hope you're really excited for what comes next. I know I am. And as always, thank you so much for listening. See you soon.